And now, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to your American Society of Criminology's president, Dr. Karen Heimer.
Thank you. Hello, welcome to Atlanta. It's great to see everybody turning out. I hope that everyone has had a great day attending the many wonderful sessions. I just want to call your attention to the plenaries that are listed in the program tomorrow and Friday, as well as all of the other excellent sessions that are on tap. And I also want to announce that Ambassador Andrew Young will be here to receive the Presidential Justice Award on Friday at 5, and he will be making some comments afterwards. I'm really excited about that. So please come and show ASC support and appreciation for his long career of commitment to justice. We're on a tight timeline tonight, I'm told, by my boss, Chris, because we have many awards and we want to be able to share comments about each winner. So I'm going to ask that when I call the award winners' names, you come to the stage to accept your award. And then we're going to save picture taking for afterwards. But before we begin, this past year we became aware that our logo may be in need of a bit of a facelift update. And we started to hear that newer generations of researchers in other organizations may not be associating our logo with ASC. So we did some research on logos of other organizations and requested options for a new logo from a designer. And we took the options to the ASC Executive Board at our April meeting. And based on our research and discussion, ASC has selected a new logo, dramatic, that retains the traditional ASC blue color. Robert, you're a hit. That retains the traditional ASC blue color, the simplicity of the old logo, but adds some updated design elements and the words American Society of Criminology, it's gone, American Society of Criminology, so that others will clearly associate the logo with our association. Okay, and now we begin. I'm going to time myself. Okay, so first I want to thank all of the committee chairs and all of the members who've served on our awards committees this year. I understand very well how much time this service takes, and I'm really grateful for your wonderful work, as is the entire association. So thank you so much to all of you who served on committees. Can we actually just give a round of applause to all those folks? It's kind of the hidden labor. The first awards tonight that we'll present will be the Ruth Peterson Fellowship for Racial and Ethnic Diversity. And the first winner of that award is Sade Lindsay, who is a doctoral student. You can come on up. In sociology at The Ohio State University. She has won other awards, including paper awards from the American Sociological Association. She's won awards from the Sociology Department at OSU and from the Midwest Sociological Society. She's involved in several research projects on race, gender, and justice. She's already successfully published her work. Her dissertation will investigate the relationship between prison education and post-release employment outcomes among formerly incarcerated people. Congratulations, and a little something else there, too.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Our next Peterson Award winner, our next new Peterson Fellow is Brooklyn Hitchens. And Brooklyn is a doctoral candidate in sociology at Rutgers University. She's also received the Louis Bevier Dissertation Fellowship and the American Sociological Association's Minority Fellowship. She's already published quite a few papers in peer-reviewed journals. Her dissertation uses street participatory action research to explore how Black urban women and girls use violence and/or crime to cope with the structural strain that permeates low-income communities of color. Congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Is Tamika? Oh, great. Our next Peterson Award winner is Tamika Samuel Jones. Tamika is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Sociology and Criminology and Law at the University of Florida. Her dissertation project is entitled Regulatory Law and Local Stakeholder Influences on Green Crime in the Blue Mountains, Jamaica. She's particularly interested in the role of legal pluralism on the discourses between local and indigenous groups about environmental regulatory law, and she too has published her work already. Congratulations to you, Tamika. The next award is the Jean Carté Award, which was established in 1971 and is given to recognize outstanding scholarly work of students. The first place winner of the Jean Carté Award this year is Christina Thompson Garrity. And we have the Wiley representatives up here to give out the money. Apparently I'm not allowed to touch it. Christina's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Her research interests include structural and population dynamics, quantitative methods and spatial analyses, and issues related to the rural context. She's awarded the first place Carté Award for her paper, Rural Islands or Not, Exploring Rural-Urban Interdependency, Labor Markets, and Violence. Congratulations, Christina. Nice to meet you. Our second place winners, it's a team, is Jihoon Kim and Youngjum Lee. Jihoon Kim is now assistant professor in the Department of Criminology, Sociology, and Geography at Arkansas State University. He received his PhD in Criminology, Law, and Society from the University of Florida in 2018. His publications appear in Criminal Justice and Behavior, Crime and Delinquency, and Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency. Youngjum Lee is, am I standing in front? Oh, okay, great. Earned her PhD from the University of Florida in 2018 and is an assistant professor in the Justice Center at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. You may get the prize for coming the farthest. Her recent publications appear in academic journals such as Crime and Delinquency, Criminal Justice and Behavior, and the Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency. These scholars have received the second place Carté Award for their paper entitled Revisiting the Overlap Between Delinquency and Peer Delinquency Through a Life Course Perspective. Congratulations. Thank you. And the third place Carté winner is Eileen Kirk. Eileen is a PhD student in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Northeastern University in Boston. Her recent work examines the relationship between mass incarceration and neighborhood crime, exploring how the geographic concentration of criminal justice system involvement contributes to neighborhood disadvantage and disruption of social functions. She's being honored with a third place Carté Award for her paper titled Putative Disadvantage, Prison Cycling as a Dimension of Concentrated Disadvantage. Congratulations. The ASC's Teaching Award recognizes excellence in undergraduate and/or graduate teaching over the span of an academic career. This year's recipient is Danielle Roods who is an associate professor of criminology, law, and society. You have a long title. She's associate professor of criminology, law, and society, and the deputy director of the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence at George Mason University. The committee found Dr. Rood's record of teaching accomplishments quite impressive in terms of her commitment and extensive work with both undergraduate and graduate students. I lost my place. She's done a lot of curriculum development and the creation of the undergraduate research laboratory, where hands-on learning comes together with research, mentoring, and service. Professor Rood's research, which is supported by a variety of agencies, focuses on prisons, jails, probation, parole agencies, and problem-solving courts, including working with corrections agencies during adoption, adaptation, and implementation of various practices and reforms. She's received several other awards for her teaching, mentoring, and research. Congratulations, Sonia. Exciting. Next is the Mentor Award. This year's award for a career of excellence in mentorship is Frances Cullen, who's distinguished. They want you on the X. Frank is Distinguished Research Professor Emeritus and Social Research Associate in the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. Professor Cullen has an extensive record of mentoring, having advised and mentored over 50 new scholars. He's published extensively with current and former students. The committee admired Dr. Cullen's track record of mentoring students across a wide range of topic areas. In addition to one-on-one mentoring, Professor Cullen distinguished himself from the other nominees through his serious engagement in the promotion of mentoring among his colleagues and peers, including writing articles and book chapters that promote mentorship and advising colleagues on how to successfully publish research with their students. You all probably know that Professor Cullen holds many honors and has served the profession in many ways, and I have only time to mention a few. He's past president of the ASC and ACJS. He's a fellow of the ASC. He's received the Sutherland and Block Awards and many awards from ACJS. And I have to say, when I wrote to Frank to tell him about this, I said that I bet this award may mean more to you than all of the others. And he agreed.
Thank you. Actually, I think the Sutherland Award was a bit better, but just kidding. I just get a minute to talk here. We're not supposed to do this, but what can they do when you're this old? And so I just say that you know, I've learned that I love research and everything it's brought to me, but one of the things I've learned is that publications don't love you. But your students do, and I've been extraordinarily fortunate to have so many students who nominated me. I want to particularly point out Teresa Kulig, Travis Pratt, and Cheryl Johnson, who put together this enormous packet, and all the tens of former students who wrote letters. You've really meant a lot to me, and this has been critical in my having a wonderful life. Thank you very much.
The next award is the Cavan Young Scholar Award. The Cavan Young Scholar Award is given to recognize outstanding scholarly contributions to the discipline of criminology by someone who has received their degree no more than 5 years before the year of the award. This year's recipient of the Cavan Award is Holly Neiseth-Brem. Dr. Neiseth-Brem is an assistant professor of sociology at The Ohio State University. She's published more than 20 articles examining genocide and human rights, with recent articles appearing in Criminology, Social Problems, and Social Forces. She currently has not one but 2 NSF grants to support her work. The award committee writes that Professor Neiseth-Brem is a leading scholar in the field of genocide studies and in the criminology of genocide. Her work is praised for its excellent quality, innovative designs, and her ability to leverage both qualitative and quantitative methods. One of the letter writers noted that Dr. Neiseth Brem's scholarship is shaping the direction of criminology of mass atrocity, a vital yet overlooked area of our discipline. The committee concludes Dr. Neiseth Brem represents the best of what young scholars in our field can be and do for the world at large. Congratulations. Thank you. The next award is the Outstanding Article Award. The American Society of Criminology gives this award to honor exceptional contributions made by scholars in article form. The award is given annually for the peer-reviewed article that makes the most outstanding contribution to research in criminology, and the committee this year considered articles published during the 2016 calendar year. Professor Michael L. Walker is the recipient of this year's Outstanding Article Award. He's receiving the award for his 2016 paper published in the American Journal of Sociology entitled Race Making in a Penal Institution. Dr. Walker is assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Minnesota. In the winning paper, Professor Walker uses ethnographic data collected in jails in Southern California and explores both the process and consequences of racial formation in jails. He shows that jail environments that are highly racialized are more repressive and report higher rates of interracial violence, which is itself used to control the speech and behavior of inmates. The award committee noted that this groundbreaking article raises important questions about the way that race is managed in penal institutions, as well as the state of racial progress more broadly. Currently, Professor Walker is working on a book based on his ethnography of this county jail. Party, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I'm so happy. And now, the Michael J. Hindelang Book Award. This is given annually for a book published within 3 calendar years preceding the award, and the requirement is that the book make the most outstanding contribution to research in criminology. The 2018 winner of the Hindelang Award is Marie Gottschalk. Professor Gottschalk is in political science at the University of Pennsylvania. She is a leading expert on the carceral state. Dr. Gottschalk is being honored with the Hindelang Award for her latest book, Caught: The Prison State and the Lockdown of American Politics, which also won the 2016 Michael Harrington Award from the American Political Science Association. So everybody, if you haven't read the book, it's on the must-read list. She's also written the award-winning The Prison and the Gallows, The Politics of Mass Incarceration in America, and The Shadow of the Welfare State. The committee wrote, Caught provides a nuanced analysis of mass incarceration and a critique of current progressive reform strategies. Gottschalk analyzes the 2 dominant penal reform strategies that developed in opposition to mass incarceration and identifies shortcomings of both of the reform strategies, asserting that neither strategy on its own is capable of dismantling the carceral state. The committee described Gottschalk's book as sweeping, ambitious, and authoritative. Congratulations. Wonderful. Thank you. Next, we have the ASC Fellows. The title of Fellow is given to members who have achieved distinction in criminology. The honorary title Fellow recognizes persons who've made scholarly contributions to the intellectual life of the discipline, whether in the form of a singular major piece of scholarship or a cumulative body of work. In addition, a fellow must have made significant contribution to the field through the career development of other criminologists and or through organizational activities within the ASC, and all of these folks have done all of those things. Our first 2018 fellow is Joanne Belknap. Joanne is professor of ethnic studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. She's widely known for being an early leader in research on the unique characteristics and experiences that bring women and girls into the justice system as offenders. She's also known for her expertise on gender-related forms of violence and criminal justice system responses to that violence. She's disseminated her work to social justice advocates and criminal justice practitioners. Her textbook, The Invisible Woman, is now in its 4th edition. She has a very large number of peer-reviewed publications. She's published extensively with students. She's received many grants. She's won the Distinguished Scholar Award from the DWC and has served the ASC as an executive board member, president, and has been on a wide range of ASC committees throughout her career. Congratulations, Joanne.
If anybody knows where to get me.
Our next new fellow is Lori Crivo. Lori's professor of sociology at Rutgers University. She's a leading scholar in the areas of criminology and demography. Much of her research has meticulously documented how neighborhood crime rates are affected by social and economic inequalities and by race and ethnic segregation. She's author of Divergent Social Worlds, Neighborhood Crime and the Racial Spatial Divide with Ruth Peterson. Lori played a critical role in developing the first national neighborhood crime study. She's received many grants. I felt really bad. She's contributed extensively to the career development of young scholars throughout her work with the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network, which is now in its 16th year. She was awarded the 2012 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Division on People of Color of Crime. She has served the ASC as an executive board member and on numerous committees over the years. Congratulations, Lori.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
Our next fellow is Daniel Mears. Dan is the Mark Stafford Professor of Criminology at Florida State University. Professor Mears is well known for his scholarship in several areas, including race, crime, and justice, the link between economic conditions and the application of social control, and criminological policies. He's the author of 3 books on criminal justice policy, including the award-winning American Criminal Justice Policy, Prisoner Reentry in the Era of Mass Incarceration, and most recently, Out of Control Criminal Justice. He also has authored many journal articles, additional publications, and also has received many grants. Dan has contributed to the career development of many scholars through his direct role in the dissertation and publication mentoring, and he served on several ASC committees during his career. Congratulations, Dan. And our fourth fellow this year, fourth new fellow for 2018, is Faye Taxman. Dr. Taxman is university professor and director of the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence at George Mason University. She's a well-regarded expert in the areas of probation, community corrections, and drug-involved offenders. She's known for developing a series of translational tools to advance the use of evidence-based practices in criminal justice organizations. Dr. Taxman has written many peer-reviewed articles, 4 books, and many other publications. Her research has been funded by just about every federal agency there is, I think. The ASC's Division of Sentencing and Corrections has recognized her as Distinguished Scholar twice. She's received the Joan McCord Award, and she's also received the Joan McCord Award from the Division of Experimental Criminology. Many congratulations. The Herbert Block Award recognizes the outstanding service contributions to the American Society of Criminology and to the professional interests of criminology. This year's Block Award winner is David Farrington. Dr. Farrington is Emeritus Professor at the Institute of Criminology at Cambridge University. The committee wrote in their report on this latest, that Professor Farrington's work for the ASC and the discipline is simply outstanding, which is very true after I read all of the various, and so I can only give you a highlight sampling because there are so many. We don't have time to discuss all his involvement in the ASC and the discipline. I'm going to highlight the most notable. He's been the president of the ASC, president of the Academy of Experimental Criminology, president of the British Society of Criminology. He helped to develop the division of experimental criminology, the division of sentencing and corrections, the division on developmental and life course criminology, and the new division on biopsychosocial criminology. Clearly, Professor Farrington has devoted enormous time to leadership in various professional organizations, including the ASC, and his work within the divisions is extraordinary. His committee service to the ASC and other professional organizations is just outstanding. His research has been honored by many, many organizations. Let me just give you some of the highlights, and I'll focus on the ASC awards. First of all, he won the Stockholm Prize in criminology. He's an ASC Fellow, a past recipient of the Sutherland, Celine Gluck, and Vollmer. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The Celine Gluck Award honors criminological scholarship that considers problems of crime and justice as they're manifested outside of the United States, internationally or comparatively. This year's Celine Gluck Award winner is Professor Lorraine Mazerol. There she is. Dr. Mazerol is an Australian Research Council Laureate Fellow and Chief Investigator with the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Children and Families over the life course. Dr. Mazerol began her career in the United States and then moved home to Australia, to Griffith University. In 2009, she became the Foundation Chair of Criminology at the School of Social Science at the University of Queensland. She's a Fellow of the ASC and the Academy of Experimental Criminology and the Academy of the Social Sciences of Australia. She's won numerous ASC section awards, too many to mention. She's published 5 books, 3 edited volumes, and many peer-reviewed papers in leading journals. The committee was comprised of internationally recognized scholars, and they wrote of her work. Dr. Mazerol's research is highly recognized internationally. One of her main topics is the influence of community and place on crime and violence, particularly on legitimacy in policing. She's operationalized and tested elements of procedural justice like trustworthiness, dignity, respect, and neutrality into a specific police dialogue with citizens in Australia. This Queensland Community Engagement Trial became an empirically tested model for police engagement, not only in all of Australia, but also in Scotland, Turkey, the UK, and the United States. In sum, this is quoting from the report, Lorraine has conducted impressive research in Australia and elsewhere that has substantially increased criminological knowledge from outside North America. She is highly respected internationally and thus very deserving of the Celine Gluck Award.
Great, thank you. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
How am I missing a page? Susan. I'm missing a page.
Charlie Wilford.
Yes.
Sounds like,
Oh, good. No, this is Sally's talk.
oh,
I can't give Sally's talk. No. Do you have the script that? Oh, gosh, are you kidding?
here.
Here it is.
Yeah.
Whew. My apologies, but I have really good stuff to say. The August Vollmer Award. The August Vollmer Award recognizes an individual whose scholarship or professional activities have made outstanding contributions to justice or to the treatment or prevention of criminal or delinquent behavior. This year's Vollmer Award winner is Charles Welford. Charles is Professor Emeritus of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Maryland, College Park. In 2011, he was awarded the University of Maryland's Presidential Medal. He was director of the Maryland Justice Analysis Center for many years. He played a central role in the creation and development of the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Maryland, which he chaired for many years. He's past president of the American Society of Criminology and a fellow. In 2001, he was selected to be a lifetime National Associate of the National Academy of Sciences. And he's provided leadership on many National Academy of Science committees, including the Committee on Crime and Justice. The committee report noted that Professor Welford is the outstanding candidate for the Vollmer Award for few reasons. First, he has devoted considerable attention to translating important research findings into practice through his work with the National Academy of Sciences, with PERF, with the International Associations of Police Chiefs, and in numerous collaborative efforts with police agencies around the country. In a recent collaboration with the Police Foundation, he's writing standards for police organization that will become national models. Moreover, he's recognized for the breadth of his translational work, internationally as well as nationally, and especially within the state of Maryland. His policy contributions in Maryland are far-reaching and consequential. For more than 3 decades, he's served on numerous task forces, commissions, and advisory committees in the state. His guidance and working hand in hand with Maryland agencies to lead reform and to lead reform efforts and create better policies and justice outcomes across the state. Congratulations. Very impressive. Oh, I was going to pass out. I'm so sorry. And now, the Edwin Sutherland Award. And Sally, you maybe want to just, do you want to stay seated until I finish reading? I have quite a lot to say. Oh, come on up. Yes. The Edwin Sutherland Award recognizes outstanding contributions to theory of research in criminology on the etiology of criminal and deviant behavior, criminal justice systems, corrections, law, or justice. Sally Simpson is the 2018 winner of the Sutherland Award. Sally is professor and former chair of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Maryland, College Park. Her research examines the causes of and reactions to corporate offending and gender crime and justice. She is the principal investigator on a National Institute of Justice funded research project that examines the impact of board director diversity on corporate misconduct and whether offending and its consequences affect changes in the board. She's vice chair of the Committee on Law and Justice at the National Academy of Sciences. She's fellow of the ASC, and in 2008, she was named Distinguished Scholar by the Division on Women in Crime. Sally is the former chair of the Crime Law and Deviance section of the American Sociological Association. She's past president of the White Collar Crime Research Consortium. She's received the ASC's Herbert Block Award. She's been honored as Woman of the Year at the University of Maryland. And she's received the Gilbert Geist Lifetime Achievement Award from the National White Collar Crime Center and the White Collar Crime Research Consortium. Those are the facts. Now, the committee wrote, Professor Simpson is internationally recognized for her outstanding scholarship in the areas of both gender and crime and the etiology and control of corporate crime. In the area of gender and crime, Professor Simpson introduced feminist theory to mainstream criminology and was one of the first scholars to stimulate interest in intersectional approaches. Beyond these theoretical contributions, Professor Simpson's empirical research on gender and crime has made significant empirical advances. In the areas of etiology and control of corporate crime, she has introduced innovative theoretical perspectives, advanced unique methods for data collection, and produced important reviews spelling out where the field has gone and where it should go in the future. Now I'd like to just add a few comments of my own on Professor Simpson's work. Sally's research accomplishments are extremely impressive. She's published a very large number of peer-reviewed articles in our top-tier criminology journals, as well as in sociology and law and society journals. She's authored 2 books and edited 3 others. What is most important, however, I think, about Professor Simpson's record is the very high quality of her research. Her work is known for its incisive identification of key questions, expert use of appropriate methodologies, and crisp writing. I always envy that. I especially enjoy reading Professor Simpson's pieces that offer perspective and analysis on research in our field. She's particularly gifted at identifying the big picture, detailing strengths and weaknesses, and recommending and embarking on lines of work that push the field forward. As evidence of the high quality of Sally's work, one of her recent papers was named the 2017 Outstanding Article by the American Society of Criminology's Division on White Collar and Corporate Crime. Professor Simpson also has been a consistent mentor of graduate students, which I think is very important, and junior faculty in the areas of white collar crime and gender and crime. Many of her former students are now themselves established researchers at other institutions, including at other highly ranked criminology programs. Beyond this, Professor Simpson consistently has been an unofficial mentor to junior colleagues in criminology around the country, always willing to visit and advise the next generation of scholars. I'm not very far behind Sally at all, like a couple years in career, but I recall her being very welcoming and kind to me when I was starting out. Thank you, Sally. And as you all know, Professor Simpson will soon, Friday evening, become the president-elect of the American Society of Criminology, president in 2020. In sum, Professor Simpson has shaped criminology profoundly. She continues to shape our field nationally as well as internationally through her scholarship, leadership in the profession, and mentoring of future generations of researchers. And I am absolutely delighted to have the honor of presenting Sally Simpson as the winner of the 2018 Edwin Sutherland Award.
Thank you, Karen. That was exhausting. Thank you so much. As I look out on the group of people who are here tonight, I see that Charles Welford is in the front row, and it brings back memories of a job talk at the University of Maryland, so I hope this goes better than that did, Charles. Okay, the title of my talk is Reimagining Sutherland, 80 Years After White-Collar Crime. But before I launch into my talk, I would like to make a few acknowledgments. First of all, I did give a copy of my address to Mike Benson, Peter Yeager, Wim Huisman, Miranda Galvin, Bill Lawfer, and Tom Loughran, and they all provided very helpful, useful feedback for me on the talk. The white collar crime and the white collar and corporate crime division and the women's division. Also, I'd like to thank for their confidence in me in putting the nomination forward. I remember being kind of surprised and stunned that they had done so, so I'd like to thank them. I've been on the faculty at the University of Maryland since 1989, and that's a long time to be somewhere, but I've been surrounded by very supportive faculty, staff, and students, so I'd like to thank all of them for that support. And then finally, since my dissertation, I'd like to thank Edwin Sutherland for inspiring me for continuing to do research in this area. In his presidential address, before a joint meeting of the American Sociological and American Economic Societies in 1939, Edwin Sutherland compared and contrasted crime in the upper or white-collar class composed of respectable, or at least respected business and professional men, emphasis added, with crime in the lower class committed by persons of low socioeconomic status. And most particularly, he was concerned with crimes in relation to business. Although Sutherland was by no means the first scholar to call attention to crimes of the powerful, he was the first to call such offenders white-collar criminals. What was initially a descriptive phrase was refined several times into the now familiar definition of white-collar crime, crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of his occupation. Again, emphasis added. As white-collar crime scholars know, Sutherland's view of white-collar crime far from settled the conversation about the phenomenon. Quite the contrary. And indeed, as I shall discuss later, the debate about what constitutes white-collar crime and how to measure it is more than a definitional distraction. It has profound epistemological consequences. Yet much of what Sutherland had to say about white-collar crime 70 to 80 years ago is still true today. In many ways, the road from Sutherland to present day, thinking about crimes by business, is surprisingly straight. I don't know what happened to that. Okay. In this address, I use our current knowledge about white-collar crime to retrospectively engage with Sutherland. Because his influence is so broad and comprehensive, I narrow the focus to corporate crime specifically. Corporate crime focuses on the unlawful conduct of a corporation or its representatives acting on its behalf to achieve organizational goals. Sutherland set the standard for empirical work on corporate offenders, while also providing a critical lens with which to view the legal processes and state response to offenders. As I engage with Sutherland's ideas, I will show how some of his work was prescient. He utilized a life history approach to study corporate violators that presaged developmental and life course criminology. But there are also instances where Sutherland was short-sighted, where his vision and conceptual analytics faltered. There are important developments in the field that he did not and could not have anticipated. I highlight some of these points to emphasize both Sutherland's centrality to the field of study and to note the dynamic symbiosis that is moving it in exciting new directions. And because I know you're all worried about it, I promise not to begin this address with a litany of definitions, although I will end with some thoughts about the pernicious consequences of definitional ambiguity. Where was Sutherland spot on? One of Sutherland's most important contributions to the study of corporate crime lies with his critique of official crime data. In his view, the data failed to capture crimes by business, and as such, produced biased statistics. The source of bias rested in the political and economic power of elites to influence the administration of justice in their own favor and create laws which apply exclusively to business and the professions, which therefore involve only the upper socioeconomic classes. In other words, business crimes differ from ordinary crimes principally in the administrative procedures which are used in dealing with the offenders and not in the nature of the offending itself. To empirically demonstrate this point, Sutherland studied 70 corporations over their life careers, which on average was about 45 years. He reviewed he reviewed decisions against firms, what we might call conviction data, for violations of anti-competitive laws, labor laws, financial and other kinds of frauds, war regulations, and a few other miscellaneous offenses. Ultimately, he uncovered a total of 980 decisions, and only 158 of these decisions were by criminal courts. Conversely, 298 and 129 decisions were by civil and equity courts, respectively, and 361 by administrative commissions. To put this into perspective, more than 1/3 of the cases, 37%, were adjudicated by special administrative commissions, but only 1/6 by criminal courts. Now, Sutherland's empirical approach and justification for including civil and administrative data was challenged by many, most famously Paul Tappan, who argued that white-collar crimes can only said to have occurred when identified by the processes and requirements of formal criminal law, that is to say, deliberate intent and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because administrative and civil cases do not rely on criminal law standards, the acts cannot be characterized as crimes. Nearly 80 years later, the debate continues to simmer. But Sutherland's original point regarding the paucity of criminal adjudications remains unchallenged. Let's look at the contemporary data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission between 1991 and 2017. In fiscal year 2017, only 131 organizations, not corporations, but organizations, were convicted and sentenced in federal courts for felonies and Class A misdemeanors. And as you can see in this table, though fluctuating somewhat from decade to decade, this captures a relatively small number of criminal convictions since the U.S. sentencing guidelines went into effect in 1991. Between 1991 and end of fiscal year 2000, there were only 1,401 organizations sentenced under the guidelines for an average of 140 a year. The next decade saw numbers slightly ticking upward due to the relative few cases that were processed immediately after 1991, and that per year average increased to 197, only to drop again to an average of 160 the following decade. Generally, the pattern shows a peak number of cases in 2000, with the number of cases sliding downward after that. Now, changes in law, shifting budgets and resources, DOJ targeting and prosecution strategies, including the use of non- and deferred prosecution agreements, and instructions to focus on responsible individuals as per the Yates memo, have notably affected these numbers over time. Regardless, it is obvious that corporate offenders, as in Sutherland's day, do not end up in federal courts very often. And those that do, paradoxically, are smaller, younger, and less powerful companies. Cases for individual fraudsters, whose offenses are often unaffiliated with legitimate businesses, are much more likely to be prosecuted criminally. Indeed, research has found that many so-called white-collar offenders are actually unemployed at the time of their offenses. Few are top executives. A study by Karpoff, Lee, and Martin, for instance, studied all enforcement actions between July 1st, 1977 and September 30th, 2006, brought by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice for violations of one or more provisions of the SEC Act as amended by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Essentially, these are statutes that cover corporate financial reporting violations, fraud, and bribery. In cases where individuals were named respondents, only 1/3 included top executives who were CEOs, presidents, or chair of the board. Another 1/3 were other line executives or supervisors, and the remaining 1/3 were non-executive employees. Importantly, this study combines criminal, civil, and regulatory actions, which means relatively few of the top managers were pursued criminally. And indeed, of those found culpable, the majority received civil penalties for their illegal activities. Contemporary data reveal a paucity of corporate criminal prosecutions, but is there still a preponderance of civil and regulatory cases? Certainly the corporate landscape has changed considerably since the 1940s. Is it possible that the relative mix of cases has also shifted? Many corporate crime scholars have utilized some variation of Sutherland's approach to study corporate offenses since the 1940s. Clenard and Yeager, Pontel and Calavita, Schlegel, Idle and Gunkel, Simpson, Garner and Gibbs, Steffens, Meyer and Schwartz. Because these data are not systematically collated to count and measure business crimes, creating an offending database is still a labor-intensive process. Researchers must scour criminal, civil, and regulatory documents to match firms with reports of wrongdoing. But the evidence across studies is overwhelming. Corporate crime adjudication disproportionately occurs in civil and administrative realms. By way of example, an ongoing research project funded by NIJ finds an even more skewed distribution of criminal, civil, and regulatory cases than that identified by Sutherland. This study, compared with Sutherland's, differs on several dimensions. It focuses on federal cases brought, not convictions, a different and more limited set of offense types, accounting fraud, bribery, anti-competitive behavior, and environmental violations, but with a much larger sample of corporations over a shorter period of time. The Standard & Poor's top 3,000 companies between 1996 and 2013. The results, compared with Sutherland, relatively few criminal prosecutions. As shown in this table, of the 11,239 cases brought against firms, only 5% were pursued criminally, and the majority of those were for financial reporting, accounting fraud, and bribery offenses. Relatively few environmental and anti-competitive criminal cases were brought, although criminal prosecution is a clear statutory option for these kinds of cases. Now, getting reliable and valid rates of corporate lawbreaking still is extremely difficult, and more difficult than it should be. At the federal level, official data are scattered over dozens of regulatory agencies, and there are similar agencies at the state level as well. The data are kept in diverse formats, in systems that are naturally designed first and foremost to meet the administrative needs and goals of the agencies themselves. So combining diverse types of offenses from such dissimilar and often complex data sources into summary rates of corporate violations of law is certainly daunting, but one that with political will, a comprehensive strategy, and adequate resources could be accomplished. In this figure, Simpson and Yeager provide a data integration strategy that would capture defendant case information from counts and charges to resolution for both firms and responsible managers across criminal, civil, and regulatory sources. In addition to case details, the data collection effort would also collect individual defendant information, such as age, gender, occupation, position, and for organizations, whether it was a legitimate or criminal purpose organization, company address, type of business, and the industry in which the company was operating. With these details, it would be relatively easy to link offending firms to statistical databases on businesses such as CompuStat, RiskMetrics, or D&B Hoover's Mergent. Now, the lack of data is consequential. First and foremost, society is left with an inaccurate and stereotypical image of crime and the typical criminal. As described by Harris and Shaw, the archetypical gestalt of crime in the United States is one of a minority offender in the foreground, framed against a sea of conforming white faces. At a recent National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine workshop on the criminal justice system and social exclusion, Mark Maurer reported that white survey respondents in the United States, and I quote, overestimate the proportion of crime committed by African Americans by 20 to 30% and suggest harsher punishments when a crime is perceived to be a black crime. If crimes by business were better captured by the data, that gestalt would reflect significantly more white faces in the foreground and more African Americans and other people of color in the background. Relatedly, there are critical consequences for how the criminal justice system is perceived by the public. Corporate criminal justice remains opaque and relatively unexamined, save for some insightful deconstructive work by critical criminologists and legal scholars. Acknowledging the harms of corporate crime and regulatory failures, critics suggest that the application of law far too often appears to be arbitrary and largely symbolic. This too has consequences. If corporations are too big to fail and too big to jail, there is an increased risk that justice will be undistributed, and trust in society and its institutions likely undermined. And this is an observation made by Sutherland as well. Second, we are unable to discern the true incidence, prevalence, and scope of business crime. We know from single cases of corporate crime that the harms to victims and costs to society dwarf those of street crime. But absent consistent and reliable measures, the true costs and consequences remain obscure. Data deficiencies also limit our knowledge and understanding of the totality and character of the societal response to offenders. To what extent are punitive sanctions and other kinds of interventions levied against offending firms and their officers effective? This knowledge gap means that empirically based prevention and control policies are at best few and far between, if not entirely absent. A conclusion recently revealed in a Campbell Collaboration systematic review on corporate deterrence. Finally, over the last 50 years, we have subjected the criminal justice processing decisions to rigorous empirical inquiry at both the state and federal levels. And much has been learned about the biases and inconsistencies that arrive at the various decision points in regard to ordinary street crime. The lack of integrated systematic data on corporate crime has stymied similar work on potential sources of bias in processing. We know little about why certain cases are forwarded while others are filtered out, or the effect of firm characteristics on processing decisions. Do firm characteristics affect diversion? Who handles the case? Whether parallel prosecutions occur, and the type and severity of punishment? We simply do not know. Well, where was Sutherland prescient? In white-collar crime, Sutherland observed variations in offending patterns over time, within and between firms, and he attributed these mainly to the location of the company in the economic structure, although he also considered the potential role of firm age, size, top management team characteristics over the firm's offending history or life history. Sutherland was committed, as we all know, to differential association and social disorganization as the main explanations for all types of criminality, but he acknowledged deficiencies in the two approaches as it related to white-collar crime, and he argued that supplements were needed. With his preferences stated, Sutherland did not expand on this idea, but his foray into life histories and criminal career patterns can be seen as an early precursor to criminal career, developmental, and life course approaches. Now, most of this work in criminology has focused on antisocial behavior and violent and property offending over an individual's life course in order to unpack continuity and change in offending patterns. A key question of interest centers on whether state dependence or population heterogeneity explains involvement in crime. Is offending continuity caused by stable individual traits or characteristics set early in life, or is it influenced by certain life events above and beyond prior patterns of involvement in crime? Now, in spite of Sutherland's initial guidance, corporate criminologists have been late arrivals to the life course approach. Scholars initially adapted criminal career and life course approaches to assess the career patterns and group-based trajectories of individual white-collar offenders. These applications have highlighted unique offending trajectories, which reveal similarities between white-collar and traditional offenders, as well as similarities between offenders and non-offenders. All of the studies reveal heterogeneity among white-collar criminals, but because they rely on conviction data, it's unclear how representative the samples are of a broader white-collar offending population. Even with a conviction sample, however, the research does identify a group of Sutherland-type offenders, middle to higher social class background who tend to occupy high-end organizational positions. Now, corporate criminological scholars have begun to merge ideas from life cycle organizational approaches, which were developed nearly 60 years ago in 1950 by economist Kenneth Boulding, with a criminal career and life course perspective. The life cycle approach proposed that organizations, like people, progress through life phases. They are born, they mature, and as they become middle-aged, they start to decline. Unlike people, however, organizational decline is not inevitable. It can be reversed. Many organizations do not survive, but others, to use Rosabeth Moss Kanter's phrase, they learn how to dance and they reinvent themselves. Although organizational life cycle theory has been conceptually and empirically challenged by management researchers, it may provide a meaningful framework for integrating criminal career and life course approaches to analyze corporate offending patterns. From a state dependence argument, one might expect that the early phases of the organizational life cycle, birth and growth phase, and later stages, decline, should be most apt to produce higher levels of criminal behavior, but for different reasons. The early phases are characterized by entrepreneurial risk-taking, trial and error learning in the context of few formal bureaucratic controls. As the firm moves toward maturity, the period of trial and error gives way to fewer surprises, more organizational controls, responsive management, and less illegal activity. These corporate offenders might be called, like Moffat's, adolescent limited delinquents. A shift toward demise, however, produces external and internal stresses and pressures that may encourage illegality, especially if attempts to reconfigure and readjust are not successful. Values are compromised, leadership and bureaucratic structure has ossified, staying in business drives decision-making, and a developmental analogy or relevant pathway for firms whose offending takes off during this phase would be adult onset offending. Research by Wang and Holtfretter reveals that these firm life cycle patterns may interact with industry economic performance, such that growing firms in growing industries and declining firms in poorly performing industries even have a greater risk of offending. The notion that pathways into and out of crime may be due to different transitions and turning points is also consistent with a life course criminology. Firms that get into legal trouble early on may find it difficult to right the ship. Cumulative disadvantage may result from discovery, the imposition of sanctions, exclusions from competition, management turnover, and other negative externalities may run counter to survival. It is also possible, however, that these firms differ in fundamental ways from those that offend less consistently, less seriously, and who desist over time. Such firms may have unethical founders. They may have been set up for criminal purposes, or they are in markets that require and reward high-risk behavior. Empirically, there is evidence of continuity. Companies that offend do so more often over time than companies who offend rarely. Research has also shown that offending firms, like individual offenders, own a large portion of reported violations over time. Although these observed patterns may reflect variations in enforcement practices and not behavioral differences among corporate offenders per se, a body of cross-national investigations report similar findings. Peters and her colleagues, for instance, have drawn on life cycle theory and life course criminology to understand patterns of regulatory violations in the Dutch chemical industry. Their analysis reveals that 6.9% of Dutch chemical corporations, which have over 40 violations annually, are responsible for 25% of all violations of safety regulations by chemical companies. Just over a quarter of the companies are responsible for 61% of all violations. The high offending firms are also quite versatile in the kinds of offenses committed. Counter to research in the United States, in which OSHA violating firms appear to change behavior in response to sanctions, i.e. state dependence, the Dutch sample reveals both population heterogeneity and dependence among firms. The organizational life cycle is not a perfect parallel to developmental life course criminology. Companies consist of ever-changing aggregates of individuals. The life course analogy, with its focus on individual level transitions and turning points, may not transfer easily to the firm. Ongoing work by Steffensmeyer and Schwartz, for instance, relates age-graded role CEO transitions to corporate ethical behavior, a micro-meso link. But at the organizational level, it's unclear what might constitute a significant turning point for high offending corporations. What are the firm-level parallels to marriage, the birth of children, going into the military? Certainly, becoming a publicly held corporation, mergers, developing and launching new product lines, changing top management, or even your boards of directors may constitute significant transitions for firms. But are these transitions also turning points? More theorizing and empirical work is needed before we can discern whether a life course approach advances our knowledge about corporate crime and corporate offenders. But it certainly is a path that Sutherland set for us in his original work. Well, where was Sutherland myopic? Well, it's in the area of personality, trait theory, and corporate crime. In Sutherland's quest to develop a sociological theory capable of explaining the breadth of criminality from across social classes, he discredited pathological and trait explanations, claiming that they did not consistently fit the data of criminal behavior and were based on a biased sample of all criminal acts. To quote Sutherland, personal and social pathologies play no essential role in the causation of crime, end quote. Research in psychology and neuroscience over the past decades has provided much more detail about how the brain affects decision-making processes. In particular, studies have focused on the role of emotionality, executive functioning, arousal, desire for control, illusion of control, deceit, and self-deception as putative factors in the etiology of violence, antisocial, and criminal behavior. In criminology, nearly all of this research has linked these factors to the emergence and persistence of traditional juvenile and adult offending. Some applications, however, have associated biological and psychological traits or personality with white-collar offending. Certain characteristics, such as self-deception or emotionality, increase offending across the board, but others have unique directional effects for different types of offenders. Rain and his associates, for instance, suggest that executive functioning and other neurobiological correlates of white-collar crime may confer advantage in navigating the structure and culture of complex organizations. Similarly, desire for control, a psychological construct that is defined as the need to exercise dominance over everyday events, has been found to increase one's willingness to engage in corporate offending, especially when decision makers are under the illusion of control. Under these conditions, persons with a high desire for control also have an exaggerated sense of personal control over events, even those governed by chance. They feel infallible. Further research has found more conditional effects. Those high on desire for control do not always experience illusion of control, but chances are greater when participants are playing games of chance in which actual prizes are awarded and when odds are short versus long. Such findings are consistent with Rain's observation that white-collar criminals appear to be particularly driven by the probability of monetary awards. They also comport with the fact that most corporate crime revolves around illegal decisions and actions that yield financial benefits to the firm or by creating the illusion of profitability by financial manipulation. Because companies tend to be short-term oriented in day-to-day operations, these conditions enhance the likelihood of managerial risk-taking. Now, Sutherland also dismissed the role of emotionality as a factor in crime. And I quote, "The assumption that an offender must have some distortion of emotions seems absurd," end quote. Yet contemporary research also challenges the Sutherland position. Mike Benson and his colleagues have drawn on the work of Turner, Massey, and Trivers to describe how emotionality and self-deception can affect managerial decision-making. The brain plays a critical role in both. The interconnected structures of the modern brain with its 3 layers of neural anatomy and the pathways among them affect how information is processed. Research shows that the flow of information is not at the same speed between layers. The flow from the emotional brain to the rational brain is both larger and faster than vice versa. This suggests that human perceptions are affected first by our emotions and then, in a slightly delayed fashion, by our rational brain. Importantly, research suggests that powerful emotions, such as anger and joy, often pair with stimuli which are then stored as memories that exist below the level of consciousness. Thus, although we can rationally analyze the pros and cons of different courses of action at great length and sophistication, our actual choices are affected by emotional valences operating at a subrational level. This work is relevant for corporate crime because corporations are the organizational site within which executives and managers reflect and act. Their actions, in turn, influence the cultural environment of the organization. In the world of the corporation, where managerial decision-making is often a group affair, emotional valences can be triggered through interpersonal exchanges. Groupthink, as defined by Janus, creates exchanges in which each participant's personal beliefs and critical thinking are superseded by that of the group, so that the end result is not an average of the original starting positions of each participant, but rather something else, and perhaps something more risky. Leadership within groups can also manipulate the amount of information and specific courses of actions considered, especially when leaders are high in power motivation. Particular personality traits may even distinguish subtypes of white-collar offenders, such as leaders and followers. Couple this with other psychological traits, such as narcissism and desire for or illusion of control, and it's not surprising that managerial decisions, as well as those strategic decisions, as well as those made under crisis or in the moment, may produce less reflective and riskier outcomes than those made outside of the group context. Now, these studies and applications provide important insights into how preferences that guide offender decision-making are formed. Insights unanticipated by Sutherland. In the case of corporate crime, the constructs also may explain why empirical tests of corporate deterrence yield such mixed results. In his recent work, Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman distinguishes 2 kinds of thinking. System 1 thinking is intuitive, spontaneous, and emotional. It's often unconscious. System 2 thinking takes more time. It is deliberative and rational. System 1 thinking does the heavy lifting, handling habitual and familiar decisions and choices. But because it's unreflective, it can create bias. System 2 monitors System 1 and will get involved when System 1 requires assistance. So, for instance, an unusual or more complex problem for which more time is needed. But System 2 thinking, in spite of its deliberative character, can produce poor or irrational outcomes, in part because cognitive processes have been affected by System 1 bias. When the two systems are in agreement, impressions are turned into beliefs that shape preferences and choices. Importantly, psychological research has shown that preferences are not immutable. They change over time with new information and experiences. So how does this relate to deterrence, and specifically corporate deterrence? A series of papers by Nagin and Pigarski, Picaro, and Paternoster, and recent work by Loughran and collaborators examine intertemporal decision-making and discounting. In particular, the authors address whether and how would-be offenders' preferences regarding costs and benefits change over time, updating. And although several models of discounting exist, recent evidence suggests that individuals have hyperbolic time preferences. That is to say, they prefer to gain rewards immediately rather than delay. They are more impatient in the short run than they are in the longer term. Costs, too, are discounted, but not to the same degree as benefits. Studies of intertemporal decision-making in criminology have examined the phenomenon among high-risk youth and college undergraduates. There likely are unique circumstances and characteristics associated with the corporate context that affect the intertemporal decision process. For instance, this will keep you busy for a while. Variations in psychological traits would be expected to create heterogeneity among managers, affecting perceptions of the costs and benefits associated with certain lines of action. The corporate context, where a short time horizon is prioritized over the long term and likely rewards are more predictable than they are for street criminals, may enhance the hyperbolic discount for crime benefits. An overconfident manager under the illusion of control, confronting a challenging issue with an underlying emotional valence, is likely to prefer the more certain reward immediately, even when confronting a System 2 problem. Research has shown that people who simultaneously are challenged by a demanding cognitive task and by a temptation, such as an easy solution, are more likely to yield to the temptation. Similarly, strong emotional states can narrow one's vision regarding desirable goals. Given that corporate crime is rarely discovered and sanctioned, a preference for unambiguous short-term rewards is likely driving decision-making with relatively little consideration given to costs. Experienced managers would be more expected to engage in future illegality to the extent that their previous experiences created a positive emotional valence while enhancing overconfidence. Future corporate crime research on deterrence should test for intertemporal decision-making using models that include measures of rewards and benefits that occur at different points in time and that incorporate potential moderating factors. In closing, I return to a point made earlier about the consequences of definitions run amok. White-collar crime is not a legal term, as most of you know. Sutherland coined the term to approximately mean offenses committed by persons of high social status and respectability in the course of their occupation. Bartlett reminds us that people continue to focus on the word approximately and use that as a basis to stretch or shrink the scope of white-collar crime to serve their own purposes. Nearly 8 decades on, all of the definitional revisions and recalibrations have not clarified the phenomenon. The subject matter is amorphous. Some white-collar crime scholars attribute post-Sutherland ambiguity to the critical positivist divide, suggesting that these competing perspectives hamper obtaining clear oversight in the nature and causes of white-collar crime, from Huseman. Others do not view ambiguity as a problem. My friend John Braithwaite out there. I believe, however, that definitions matter. They matter in how we think about a phenomenon, how we measure it, and the knowledge generated about it. And let me give you 2 examples. Our theoretical understanding of how white-collar offenders are treated in the criminal justice system in terms of sentencing outcomes is entirely dependent on the definition of white-collar crime used in the analysis. Recent research by Galvin demonstrated how the use of one definition may give the impression that relative to non-white collar offenders, white collar offenders are treated with leniency. But the use of other definitions lead to an entirely different conclusion, that white collar offender status is a liability or that it's immaterial. Galvin concludes, and I quote, that debating what is truly white collar crime is not just an exercise in semantics. It is a methodological choice that can have dramatic consequences on what we think we know about the treatment of white collar crime in the criminal justice system. A second example involves results from the meta-analysis of corporate crime deterrence referred to earlier. In their search for relevant studies to include in the systematic review, the researchers noted that previous studies conceptualized and measured the term corporate crime in a widely varied manner. The different definitions of the subject matter created a cascading effect. Definitions affected measurement, measurement affected research design, and ultimately studied conclusions regarding effective prevention and control strategies. Given that substantial harm is associated with corporate crime, such imprecision is costly to knowledge and evidence-based policy. Ironically, ambiguity may have another consequence. It may also reduce the urgency to develop a systematic database on white-collar offending. I began this address by expressing deep admiration for the contributions Edwin Sutherland made to our knowledge about and understanding white-collar and corporate crime. His work necessitates that scholars take his arguments and ideas seriously, but not so literally that it hampers how the field advances. Corporate crime, like all crime, has changed and evolved over the past 80 years. Drawing from criminology and related disciplines, there are many new and exciting avenues of research and innovative theoretical approaches that are far too numerous to document here. In spite of these developments, however, a glaring data problem remains that thwarts our basic knowledge about corporate crime. The corporate crime data gap has forced scholars to draw on alternative sources and records to capture the phenomenon, and many of these efforts are very creative. Morcelli and his collaborators, for instance, have built an extensive database using procurement data, public procurement records, to pinpoint likely collusion among construction companies over space and time. Cross-disciplinary scholars, such as those trained in business, utilize machine learning techniques to review financial statistics reported by companies to differentiate firms likely engaging in accounting fraud from those that do not. Promising approaches, however, cannot substitute for a comprehensive, systematic corporate violations database, publicly available and accessible to all. With more comprehensive data available, researchers and practitioners could draw from existing scientific knowledge to improve the quality and usefulness of the data collected. We could learn a great deal, for instance, from advances in urban policing strategies, supported by sophisticated mapping and extensive data from evidence-based and place-based criminology to identify, investigate, and predict corporate offenses and offenders, as Bill Laufer has suggested. Yet this type of scientific and subject matter cross-pollination rarely, if ever, occurs. Sutherland called out for better data, and it's my hope that it doesn't take another 80 years to solve the problem. Thank you very much.